Chapter 2. Pierre Gringoire. However, while Jupiter was delivering his speech, the pleasure and admiration so universally excited by his costume were dispelled by his words, and when he arrived at that unfortunate conclusion, "As soon as the most eminent cardinal arrives, we shall begin," his voice was drowned out by a roar of hoots. "Begin immediately! The mystery! The play at once!" screamed the people. Above all the other voices, piercing through the general uproar, like the sound of a fife in a charivari at Nîmes, was that of Joan de Molendino. "Begin at once!" piped the student. "Down with Jupiter and the Cardinal of Bourbon!" yelled Robin Poussepain and the other clerks perched on the window ledge. "The morality play now!" roared the crowd. "At once! Immediately! The sack and the rope for the players and the cardinal!" Poor Jupiter, haggard, frightened, and pale beneath his rouge, let fall his thunderbolts, took his helmet in his hand. Then, bowing and trembling, he stammered, "His Eminence, the ambassadors, Lady Margaret of Flanders." He did not know what to say next. In truth, he was afraid of being hanged by the populace for waiting this long, or of being hanged by the cardinal for not waiting. In either case he saw only an abyss, that is to say, a gibbet. Fortunately, someone came forward to extricate him from his plight and to assume responsibility. An individual who stood inside the barricade in the space left clear around the marble table, and whom up till now no one had noticed, so completely was his long and slender figure concealed from every eye by the size of the pillar against which he had leaned. This person, we say, tall, thin, pale, lightly complexioned, still young, though wrinkles were already visible in his forehead and cheeks, with sparkling eyes and smiling mouth, clad in a garment of black serge, tattered and shiny with age, approached the marble table and made a sign to the wretched victim. But Jupiter, in his perturbation, did not notice. The newcomer advanced another step farther. "Jupiter," he said, "my dear Jupiter." Still the other did not hear him. At last the tall, fair man, losing all his patience, shouted almost in his face, "Michel Gibon!" "Who calls me?" said Jupiter, as if awakened from a trance. "I," replied the personage all in black. "Ah," said Jupiter. "Begin at once," returned the other. "Satisfy the people. I will appease the bailiff, who will in turn appease the cardinal." Jupiter now sighed with relief. "Messieurs the bourgeois," he shouted as loudly as he could to the crowd, who continued to hoot at him, "we are going to begin now." "Evoe Jupiter, plaudite cives," cried the scholars. "Noel! Noel!" cried the people. There was deafening applause. Even after Jupiter had withdrawn behind his tapestry, the hall still rang with acclamations. Meanwhile the unknown, who had so magically changed the tempest into a calm, had modestly retired to the shadow of his pillar, and no doubt would have remained there, unobtrusive, motionless, and silent as before, had he not been drawn out by two young men who, being in the first row had he not been drawn out by two young women who, being in the first row of spectators, had heard his colloquy with Michel Giborn Jupiter. "Master," said one, beckoning him to approach. "Hush, my dear Leonard," said her neighbor, pretty, rosy-cheeked, and quite unself-conscious on account of her elegant holiday attire. "He is not a clerk, he is a layman. You should not say master to him, but monsieur." "Monsieur," then said Leonard. The unknown approached the barrier. "And what do you want with me, mesdemoiselles?" he asked with an air of complacence. "Oh, nothing," said Leonard, all confused. "It's my neighbor here, Gisquette le Gancien, who would speak with you." "No, no," said Gisquette, blushing. "It was Leonard who said master to you. I only told her that she ought to say monsieur." The two girls demurely lowered their eyes. The gentleman, who was eager to talk with them, smiled and answered, "You have nothing to say to me then, mesdemoiselles?" "Nothing at all," answered Gisquette. "Nothing," repeated Liénard. The young man made a step to retire, but the two curious damsels had no mind to let him go so easily. "Monsieur," said Gisquette, with the with the impetuosity of a sluice that is suddenly opened or a woman making a resolution. "Then you know the soldier that's going to play the part of Our Lady the Virgin in the mystery?" "You mean the part of Jupiter?" returned the unknown. "Oh my, yes," said Liénard. "Is she stupid? So you know Jupiter then?" "Michel Gibbon?" "Yes, madame." "He has a splendid beard," answered Liénard. What what they are going to play be very fine?" asked Gisquette timidly. "Very fine indeed, mademoiselle," answered the informant without the least hesitation. "What will it be?" said Liénard. "The good judgment of Our Lady the Virgin. A morality play, if it please you, mademoiselle." "Ah, that's different," returned Liénard. A short sentence was begun, but it was interrupted by the young man. "It is an entirely new morality play," he said, "which has never been performed before." "Then it's not the same," said Gisquette, "as the one played 2 years ago on the day of the entry of Monsieur the Legate, in which there were 3 beautiful girls who performed—" "As sirens," finished Liénard. "And all naked," added the young man. Liénard modestly cast down her eyes. Gisquette looked at her, and did likewise. The gentleman continued, smiling, "It was a very pretty thing to see, but today it is a play expressly written for Madame the Lady of Flanders." "Will they sing love songs?" asked Gisquette. "Oh, fie," said he. "What, in a morality play? You must not confound one kind of play with another. Now, if it were a sotie, well and good." "That's a pity," replied Gisquette. That day at the Ponceau fountain there were wild men and women who fought with one another and formed themselves into different groups, singing little motets and love songs." "What is suitable for a legate," said the stranger dryly, "is not suitable for a princess." "And close by," continued Liénard, "were playing a number of bass instruments that carried wonderful melodies." "And to refresh the passers-by," resumed Gisquette, "the fountain gushed forth wine, milk, and hippocras from 3 mouths, and everyone drank what he wanted." "And a little below the Ponceau fountain," continued Liénard, "at the Trinity fountain there was a passion play acted without words." "Oh yes, how I remember it!" exclaimed Gisquette. "God on the cross and the 2 thieves on each side of him." Here the 2 friends, warming to the recollection of the legate's entry, began speaking both at once. "And farther on, at the Porto Pantre, there were other characters very richly dressed. And at the Fountain of the Holy Innocents, do you remember that huntsman following a hind, with a great noise of dogs and hunting trumpets? And then at the Boucherie de Paris, those scaffolds representing the fortress of Dieppe. And when the legate passed, remember, Gisquette, they sounded the assault, and the English all had their throats slit. And what fine characters there were against the Châtelet gate, and on the Pont au Change, which was all covered with draperies. And when the legate went over it, they let fly from the bridge over 200 dozen birds of all kinds. Wasn't that a fine sight, Liénard?" There will be a finer performance today," at length interrupted the stranger, who seemed to listen to them impatiently. "You promise us that this mystery shall be a fine one?" asked Gisquette. "Without a doubt," he answered. And then he added with peculiar emphasis, "Mesdemoiselles, I wrote it." "Really?" said the young ladies in excitement. "Really," answered the poet, bridling a little. "That is, there were 2 of us, Gérard Marchand, who sawed the planks and put together the wooden structure of the stage, and myself who wrote the play. My name is Pierre Gringoire." The author of The Cid could not have said with greater pride, Pierre Corneille. Our readers may have observed that some time must have elapsed since Jupiter retired behind the drapery and the author of this new morality play revealed himself thus abruptly to the naive admiration of Gisquet and Liénard. Strange to say, all that multitude, who a few minutes before had been so tumultuous, now waited patiently with implicit faith in the player's word. An evidence of that everlasting truth, still demonstrated daily in our theaters, that the best means of making the audience wait patiently is to assure them that the performance will commence immediately. However, the student Joan did not fall asleep. "Hullo!" he suddenly shouted, amid the peaceful expectation which had succeeded the disturbance. "Jupiter, Madame de Virgin, ye rowers of the devil's boat, are you making sport of us? The play! The play! Begin or we'll begin again!" That was enough. Music from high and low-keyed instruments was heard coming from beneath the structure. The curtain was raised, and 4 characters in motley attire and with painted faces came out, clambered up the steep ladder onto the upper platform, ranged themselves in a row facing the audience, whom they greeted, each bowing low. Then the overture ended. The play was about to begin. After receiving abundant payment for their bows by the plaudees of the multitude, the 4 characters, now honored by a profound silence, proceeded to deliver their prologue, which we will graciously spare the reader. However, as still happens in our own time, the audience paid more attention to the costuming of the performers than to the roles they enacted. And in truth they did rightly. All 4 were dressed in gowns half yellow and half white, different from each other only in the nature of the material. The first being of gold and silver brocade, the second of silk, the third of wool, and the fourth of linen. The first of these characters carried in his right hand a sword, the second 2 gold keys, the third a scale, and the fourth a spade. And in order to assist the sluggish wits who might not have clearly understood these properties, on the hem of the brocade robe was embroidered in huge black letters, "I am nobility." On the silk one, "I am clergy." On the woolen one, "I am trade." And on the linen one, "I am labor." The sex of the 2 male characters was plainly indicated by the comparative shortness of their garments, and by their Phrygian caps, while the 2 female ones wore longer robes and hoods. It would indeed have indicated perversity if one could not have seen through the poetic drapery of the prologue that labor was married to trade, and clergy to nobility, and that these 2 happy couples possessed in common a magnificent golden dolphin, which they proposed to award to the most beautiful damsel. Accordingly, they were traveling over the whole world in the quest of this beauty, and, after successively having rejected the Queen of Golconda, the Princess of Trebizond, the daughter of the Grand Khan of Tartary, etc., etc., labor and clergy, nobility and trade had come to rest themselves on the marble table of the Palace of Justice, and deliver at the same time to the worthy audience as many moral sentiments and maxims as might in that day be expended upon the members of the Faculty of Arts at the examinations, sophisms, determinants, figures, and acts, when the masters took their degrees. All this was in truth very fine. Meanwhile, in all that assemblage upon which the 4 allegorical characters were pouring out floods of metaphors, there was no ear more attentive, no heart more palpitating, no eye more eager, no neck more outstretched than the ears, eyes, neck, and heart of the author, the poet, the gallant Pierre Gringoire, who a moment before had been unable to resist the temptation to tell his name to 2 pretty girls. He had retired again behind his pillar, and there it was that he listened, watched, and enjoyed. The favorable applause which had greeted the opening of his prologue was still resounding in his breast, and he was completely absorbed in that kind of ecstatic contemplation with which a dramatic author follows his ideas as they tumble one by one from the lips of the actor, in the silence of a vast auditorium. O worthy Pierre Gringoire! It pains us to mention it, but this first ecstasy was very soon disturbed. Scarcely had the lips of Gringoire approached this intoxicating cup of joy and triumph than a drop of bitterness mingled with it. A tattered beggar, who, lost as he was among the crowd, could receive no contributions, and who, we may suppose, had not found sufficient indemnity in the pockets of his neighbors, had conceived the bright idea of perching himself conspicuously in order that he might attract the attention and the alms of the audience. Accordingly, while the first lines of the prologue were being recited, he had climbed, by means of the pillars that supported the reserved gallery, to the cornice which ran around the bottom of its balustrade, and there he seated himself, soliciting the attention and the pity of the crowd by his rags and a hideous sore that covered his right arm. But he spoke not a word. The silence which he kept allowed the prologue to proceed without incident, and no perceptible disorder would have occurred, but that, as ill luck would have it, the student Joan espied, from his own perch upon one of the great pillars, the beggar and his antics. A wild fit of laughter seized the young rascal, and having no regard for his interruption of the performance, and his disturbance of the general attention, he cried out in a tone of gaiety, "Look at that fraud over there begging!" Anyone who has ever thrown a stone into a pond full of frogs, or fired a gun among a flock of birds, can have some idea of the effect produced by these unseasonable words, which interrupted the attention fixed upon the heroes of the mystery. Gringoire jerked as if he had felt an electric shock. The prologue was cut short, and all heads suddenly turned toward the beggar, who, far from being disconcerted, found in this incident a good opportunity to make a harvest, so he began to whine in a piteous voice, with his eyes half closed, "Charity, I beg you." "Why, as I live," resumed Joan, "it's Clopin Trouillefou. Hullo, friend, so your sore wasn't comfortable on your legs, so you have put it on your arm, have you?" And so saying, he threw, with the dexterity of a monkey, a small white coin into the old greasy felt hat which the beggar held out with his diseased arm. The beggar received both the alms and the sarcasm without flinching, and continued piteously, "Charity, I beg you." This episode had considerably distracted the assembly, and a good number of spectators, led by Robin Poussin and all the clerks, merrily applauded this whimsical duet, spontaneous as it was, performed in the middle of the prologue, by the student with his shrill voice, and the beggar with his monotonous drone. Gringoire was very much displeased. Having recovered from his first astonishment, he yelled to the four characters on the stage, "Go on, what's the devil, go on!" without even glancing at the two interrupters. At that moment he felt someone tug the tail of his coat. He turned around, not without some ill humor, and focused a smile, for it was Gisquette Legoncien, who had thrust a pretty arm through the barricade to get his attention. "Monsieur," said the young girl, "will they go on?" "Yes, of course," answered Gringoire, rather offended by her question. "In that case, monsieur," she continued, "would you kindly explain to me—" "What they are going to say?" interrupted Gringoire. "Well, listen." "No," said Gisquette, what they have already said." Gringoire started like a man whose open wound has been touched. "A plague on this stupid, witless little wench," he muttered, and for that moment Gisquette was utterly ruined in his estimation. Meanwhile the actors had obeyed his injunction. The public, seeing that they were once more trying to speak, settled back to listen, not, however, with having lost much poetic beauty, in trying to solder the two parts into which the play had been so abruptly broken. Gringoire bitterly realized this. However, tranquillity was gradually restored. The student held his tongue, the beggar was busy counting some coins in his hat, and the play resumed. Really, it was a very fine composition, and we truly think that with a few modifications it would well be played even today. The plot, overly drawn and a bit dry, was simple, and Gringoire, in security of his own judgment, admired its clearness. As may well be supposed, the four allegorical personages were a little fatigued by traveling over 3 parts of the globe, without finding anyone suitable to receive their golden dolphin. Hence a long eulogy upon the marvelous fish, the countless delicate allusions to the young prince, betrothed to Margaret of Flanders, but who at this time was in very dismal seclusion at Amboise, not having the slightest idea that labor and clergy, nobility and trade had just been making a tour of the world on his account. The said Dolphin, then, was young, handsome, strong, and above all possessed the greatest of all virtues, being the son of the Lion of France. I declare that this bold metaphor is admirable, and that dramatic natural history, in a day of allegory and in a royal epithalamium, finds nothing at all odd in the dolphin's being the son of a lion. On the contrary, it is precisely those rare and Pindaric mixtures that prove the poet's enthusiasm. However, as a just critic, I must declare that the poet could have developed this beautiful idea in less than 200 lines. It is true that, according to the order of the Monsieur the Provost, the play was to last from noon until 4 o'clock, hence it was necessary to use a lot of words. Besides, everyone was listening patiently. All at once, just in the middle of a quarrel between Madame Trade and Madame Nobility, when Master Labor was reciting this wondrous line, "Beast more triumphant never in the woods I've seen," the door to the reserved gallery, which until then had remained so unseasonably shut, now opened even more unseasonably, and the stentorian voice of the doorkeeper abruptly announced, "Eminence, Monseigneur the Cardinal of Bourbon!"